Today we have a very special video, and it is upon request, and it is, could Godzilla defeat Ancalagon, or otherwise known as Ancalagon the Black? There have been many different pieces of information stating various sizes that Ancalagon could be. The common consensus is that he is ridiculously huge. The only things that we have to go off of to clue us in as to what size he was him being said to be as tall as a mountain. He was also said to have destroyed the towers of Thangorodrim, I think that's how you pronounce it, when he fell on them from out of the sky. Thangorodrim is said to be a group of 3 gigantic active volcanoes within the Iron Mountains in the north of Middle Earth during the First Age. People think that he was so large that he probably smushed them to smithereens, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he was much larger than they were. Depending on the impact, a much smaller creature could cause that kind of destruction, even in death. And Durian's Bane, breaking the slopes of Celebdil, I think that's how you pronounce that too, is an example that is used. Even though Ancalagon's fire was not strong enough or hot enough to melt or burn the ring, it was said that he had fire hotter than any other dragon's flame, and he was the largest dragon. People say that he's as big as a mountain, people say that he's much bigger than a mountain, but nobody knows for sure exactly how big that is, as there are varying sizes of mountains as well. Ancalagon is basically as large as we want him to be. Now, there are some that stated that the towers of Thangorodrim were actually estimated to be 35,000 feet tall and 5 miles across each. So they deduced that for the big dragon to smash all of them, his wingspan would have to be at least 15 miles across. 15 miles equals 79,200 feet, which is the equivalent of 24,140 meters. For some perspective, Legendary's Godzilla is said to be about 355 feet tall. Based on the little bit of information that we've gathered, Godzilla is significantly smaller than Ancalagon. Godzilla has performed some really ridiculous feats in the comics, but we're talking about the cinematic universe, modern Legendary Godzilla. We have this long-standing joke that cinematic versions of comic characters are usually nerfed to all hell. If we're using this picture as an example, looking at Smog, we can tell that Godzilla would be nowhere near equipped to handle fighting Ancalagon. Again, we don't know how accurate of a representation this is, but let's just say that Ancalagon is this huge. Godzilla's atomic breath would probably do nothing to him. It may be the equivalent of a mosquito biting us. As of this video, we haven't seen Godzilla face off of any other bigger and more destructive foes than Ghidorah. We see that Godzilla powers up from becoming his fire version. So it is possible that if Ancalagon blew fire on Godzilla, that he could survive. It is very hard to kill Godzilla, especially from the outside. He seems more real in the legendary version than we give him credit for, but after seeing Godzilla King of Monsters and the stuff that's happened in there, I think that there may be some element of magic, at least to us, when it concerns Godzilla. So with that in mind, he could withstand the fire from Ancalagon. I mean, Godzilla was dropped from the frickin' sky, and he survived. He is super thick. This dude that almost weighs 100,000 tons fell from the freaking sky and just lay there like, holy crap, I'm having a really bad day. So I think he could hold his own against Ancalagon. But if Ancalagon were to take all of his weight and try to squish Godzilla, I think that would be the end of the road for Gojira. That is if Ancalagon is actually as big as he's portrayed in that art piece. Let's say Ancalagon got Godzilla on his back and then started pulling his legs from his body. Ancalagon is so huge that he would be able to dismember Godzilla quite easily. It would be the end for Godzilla, unfortunately. With kaiju, size still does matter, and we see this because of his fight with Ghidorah and other kaiju. I always keep calling back to Godzilla 2014 in Godzilla's fight with the Mutos. When he was fighting the female or fighting the male by himself, he wasn't so bad, but he still was struggling. And yes, maybe he was in a state of slumber. And what I mean is, the remnants of his slumber were still hanging on. He was clearly not operating at 100% in that movie. But even in Godzilla King of the Monsters, he struggled as well with kaiju that were only a little bigger than he was. Now, I'm not good at math, but I wanted to calculate just how many tons or how much weight would go behind the force of Godzilla hitting the floor, having fallen from up high. We know that in a vacuum, no matter the size of an object, they fall at the same rate. So a little beach ball is going to fall at the same rate as an airliner in a vacuum. I know, it's crazy. But in the Earth's atmosphere, we have something called air resistance that we have to worry about and terminal velocity. I'm not going to get super complicated with it because I'm going to hurt my own brain. I do literature, not math. But what I do know is that a creature like Godzilla with more surface area is going to have more air resistance when he falls. That's also why he was lit aflame when falling back through the atmosphere. So Ghidorah probably threw him up pretty high, you know, for him to catch on fire. Just an example for what I'm talking about, a piano traveling at 38 miles per hour would have an impact force of 12,000 pounds. Pianos on average weigh between 300 and 400 pounds. Some can hit 900, but it's not the average. So if a piano weighs 400 pounds and it has a drop force or an impact force of 12,000 pounds, I believe that would be the equivalent of 30 pianos dropping if one were to fall at that speed or make an impact at that speed. So the estimated distance between the surface of the Earth and the ozone layer, or the beginning of the atmosphere, is about 10 miles, which would be 16,093.4 meters. The reason why I'm putting that measurement in is because that's where we think Ghidorah dropped Godzilla from. Godzilla weighs about 90,000 tons. These are his falling parameters. So his speed at impact would be about 561.63 meters per second. In other words, this would be 1,256 miles per hour. It would take him about 57 seconds till impact. Now, the point of energy, or the amount of energy he would expend from that fall, would be this number. Let's put it in something more that we can understand. This amount of joules would be the equivalent of 3,077 or 3,078 tons of TNT. For some perspective, here is a 50-ton explosion. Why did I just go through explaining all of that? Well, if Godzilla could fall that high and survive that kind of impact, then that gives us an idea of how much he could survive if Ancalagon were to fall on him or put all his weight on him. Would Ancalagon be able to step on Godzilla and squish him? Godzilla is very dense, but in his normal mode, we've seen Godzilla succumb to even lighter attacks. In King of the Monsters, he looked like he was near death. At the time of this video, it is believed that when Godzilla had fallen to his death or become severely injured, that Ken Watanabe's character came up and placed a bomb to reinvigorate Godzilla. This is possibly what we believed that made him into Fire Godzilla, which of course made him a lot stronger. But let's just say that Ancalagon swipes Godzilla away or steps on him, and Godzilla is in the same state that he was when we saw him in the trailer lying down near death, or so it seems. What would happen if Ancalagon kept on smushing him over and over again? What would happen if Ancalagon, at that size depicted in that art piece, were to chew on him over and over again, or to swallow him? At some point, Godzilla would be so beaten down, he wouldn't have the time to regenerate adequately. I think that there's a point where Godzilla is so injured, and if he continues taking damage, that he cannot regenerate back from that. As said before in previous videos, Godzilla can die. We've seen a fossil as evidence that Godzilla's kind can die. Although they are very hard to kill, we have to believe that there are other kaiju that can kill them. It takes a lot to do so, but I don't think you guys will disagree that if something as large as Ancalagon were to take on Godzilla, that he would die. He can take a beating, but I don't think he could take very much from Ancalagon at that size at which he's depicted. Now, what if Ancalagon was the same size as Godzilla, which I'm pretty sure that he's not. I mean, we don't really have any solid evidence as to how big Ancalagon is, but based on the little descriptions that we've been given, I think it's safe to say that he would tower over Godzilla immensely. But if he was the same size, could Godzilla kill Ancalagon? Sure, he's a worthy adversary. The only thing that Ancalagon seems to have going for him is his titanic size. Sure, Ancalagon can fight, but because he's so fearsome, he really had no reason to really do so. He was already big. Maybe Ancalagon has fought countless adversaries back in his day growing up. There is not that much known about him besides what we've heard of him in the texts. But we know for sure that Godzilla has gone up against countless enemies. Now, the one thing that Ancalagon would have over Godzilla is the wings. He'd be able to fly and do attacks. But with his fire, I don't think that would be enough to subdue Godzilla, especially at Godzilla's size. Ancalagon is a very dense creature, but we have to also consider that dragons would be a lot lighter in comparison to an animal their size that doesn't have wings, because they have to get off the ground. So if Ancalagon were to be Godzilla's size, then their weight comparison would be off. Ancalagon would be a lot lighter than Godzilla would be because he'd need to fly, unless his wingspan was ridiculous. That would put Godzilla at an advantage to beat up Ancalagon. Ancalagon would also have more limbs to work with. He could use his wings to buff it, but Godzilla could also blast a hole through those wings and disable Ancalagon from flying away. Godzilla, standing higher than Ancalagon on two legs, would be able to overpower him quite easily. Of course, Ancalagon would be able to maneuver around Godzilla quite easily, being a quadruped, but Godzilla would still be in a higher weight class, and so his attacks would hit harder. At that size, Ancalagon doesn't have the dense hide that Godzilla does. We also have to consider, and a lot of people forget this, that Godzilla is primarily a marine animal. He lives not only in the depths of the ocean, deeper than other people can go safely, but he also lives beneath the earth. Think about all those tons of oceanic pressure. No wonder Godzilla is so dense and thick. He has to withstand the barometric pressure, he has to withstand all those tons of ocean pressure, not to mention the pressure under the earth as well. So it makes sense that Godzilla would be hella more dense than Ancalagon. So even though Ancalagon would be more agile and fast than Godzilla at his current size, his beatings would probably do little to nothing to Godzilla. If Ancalagon was Godzilla's size, he would lose in a battle against Godzilla. His fire would do nothing to Godzilla, and his hits would do little. Ancalagon is strictly a flying creature. I believe the Mutos had an up on Godzilla because they also came from the ocean. Do you remember in 2014, the Muto has to spend a lot of its life in the ocean. Also in Aftershock, we see that the Muto is in the ocean. So those creatures can also withstand a lot of pressure, which is why they were in a weight class similar to that of Godzilla, and they could take hits by him and also dish out those hits. For a strictly flying creature like Mothra or Ancalagon, they would be a lot lighter and less dense than creatures like Godzilla or the Mutos. However, with Ancalagon being so much sizable than Godzilla, he would win the battle at the current size at which everyone thinks he is, which is stupendously colossal. Anyways, that's it for our theory. What do you think would happen? More importantly, here's a question for you. How big do you really think Ancalagon is? Is he 3 times the size of Godzilla? 1,000,000 times the size of Godzilla? We've seen a lot of variables that comes into play when people try to estimate how big Ancalagon is, and they're all very interesting. Let us know in the comments, and thanks so much for watching. This has been Ultiori. You ask, we answer.